Hey, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from group 3. Want to make a presentation about perception of language. Let me introduce myself. My name is Ramadhani Syazali S, and there are many friends of my group. Vini Aqilla, Sita Nur Fauzia, Alfin, Rezky, and Irsyadi Sabilla. Next, us, please. Introduction. Perception of language examines language comprehends at a specific number of levels. And it also discusses the relation between comprehension of oral or speech and written language. This chapter divides into 4 sections. 1, the language structure of English, and 2, different speech sound when they are present in isolation, and 3, a continuous stream of speech, and 4, perception of written language. And next will be presented by Sita Nur Fauzia.
Okay, the structure of speech. The process of speech perception will be difficult for us because it influenced with 2 kinds of factors that interfere the meaning or sound we hear, that are environmental context, and then the auditory signals or the variability of speech signals itself. Environmental context, when we try to process the speech signals, sometimes it interferes with some environmental condition, like conversation across room or someone sneezing or burping. It can interfere with the fidelity of speech signals. Maybe we will not get a clear speech signals because some factors from the environmental condition. And the second is the auditory signals or the variability of speech signal itself. There is no one-to-one correspondence between the characteristic of the stimulus and speech sound we hear. There are some factors influence the acoustic stimulus that reach our ears. It is include voice of the speaker, that is high or low pitch, and the rate at which speaker producing the speech or intonation, and the phonetics. Next slide, please. If we're looking for deep explanation, also there are some factors. They are first, prosodic factors. Prosody here means a general term to the aspect of an utterance sounds that are not specific to the word themselves. The first is stress. What is stress? Stress is emphasis given to syllabus in a sentence. Jadi stress itu adalah suatu tekanan yang kita berikan pada suatu kata. Different stress will create a different meaning. For example, di sini ada present and present. Present di sini berarti give, berarti hadiah, sedangkan present itu introduce. Yang satunya sebagai noun, yang satunya sebagai verb. Example sentence-nya, she give me a nice present. Present. Jadi stresnya itu ada di depan. Yang sentence selanjutnya, allow me to present my friend David. Nah, di situ beda stress akan menimbulkan beda arti juga. The next is intonation. Intonation is the use of speech to signify different meaning. In English, interrogative pattern also use different intonation to create meaning. For example, yes or no question with WH question have different pattern in intonation the sentence. Declarative sentence also has different intonation. So, then the different intonation can help us to define the meaning of sound or sentence that we hear. For example, are you a teacher? Who is the teacher? I am a teacher. Jadi, intonasi dari tiga kata tersebut berbeda-beda. Dan intonasi tersebut dapat mempengaruhi makna yang kita definisikan dari kata tersebut. The next is rate. Rate is the speed at which speech is articulated. We modify our rate of speech by altering the number and length of pauses during utterance, as well as amount of time articulating speech segment. For example, I want to join this club. Let's join this club. Dua kata tersebut berbeda dalam kecepatan pengucapannya. Perbedaan tersebut mempengaruhi arti dari kalimat tersebut. Next slide. Next slide, please. Alfin masih belum muncul. Okay. The next is articulatory phonetics. Articulatory phonetic is the study of the pronunciation of speech sound. In this part, we will examine the pronunciation speed of speech sound that influence the meaning of sound that we hear. Slide-nya hilang. The next is articulatory phonetics. Articulatory phonetic is the study of the pronunciation of speech sound. In this part, we will examine the pronunciation of speech sounds that influence the meaning of sound that we hear. Actually, we have gotten this material in the previous semester. It is phonology. As we know, the speech sound differ principally in whether the airflow is obstructed and if so at what point and it what way. First is vowels and this next is consonant. Vowels is are produced by letting airflow in the lungs and in obstructed way. And consonant are produced by impeding the airflow at some point. Seperti yang kita tahu, kalau vowels itu, kalau bahasa Indonesianya itu huruf vokal, sedangkan konsonan itu yang selain huruf vokal. The next. Next slide, please. Okay. Next is place of articulation. This is there are bilabial, which is b and p, alveolar, d and t. It produced by placing the tongue against the alveolar ridge. And velar, g and k, produced in the back of the mouth because the tongue is placed against the velum at the back of the mouth. Jadi bunyi g atau g itu di sini tuh bilabial, alveolar, dan velar itu diklasifikasikan berdasarkan speech organ yang digunakan ketika mengucapkan sound tersebut. Pertama kayak beh, peh, itu kan kita menggunakan bibir yang di depan, yang mana disebut sebagai bilabial. And deh, teh, itu diproduksi karena menempatkan lidah di alveolar ridge. Deh, teh. Jadi lidahnya itu menempel dengan dinding rahang yang atas. Tuh. Velar itu produced in the back of mouth because the tongue is placed against the velum at the back of the mouth. Geh, keh, itu ada di belakang. Seperti yang kita pernah pelajari sebelumnya, ada beberapa speech organ di phonology, mungkin kita udah dapat materi ini. And the next is manner articulation. The first is stop consonant. Stop consonant, obstruct the airflow completely for a period of time, then release it. Yang kedua, fricative consonant, produced by obstructing without completely stopping the airflow, such as f and s. And the next is affricative consonant, produced by a stop-like closure, followed by the slow release characteristic of fricative. For example, in sound church and judge. And the next is voicing. As we know, there are voice and voiceless. Voice is if the chords are together, the air stream must force its way through the glottis, causing the vocal cords to vibrate. Which is voiceless, the chords are separated, the air is not obstructed at all. Jadi voice dan voiceless itu, kalau voice itu ada getaran di pita suara, sedangkan voiceless itu tidak ada getaran di pita suara. Okay, the next slide will be delivered by my friend.
Okay, thank you, Sita. The next is perception of isolated speech segments. Slide-nya.
Udah, Vin. Sorry, lemot ini sinyalnya.
Okay. Level of speech processing. There are three. First, auditory level. Second, phonetic level. And the last is phonological level. The auditory level, the signal is represented in terms of its frequency, intensity, and temporal attributes. And the phonetic level, identifying individual tones by a combination of acoustic cues, such as Forman transition. And the phonological level, the phonetic segment is converted into a phoneme, and phonological rules are applied to the sound sequence. Next, Vin.
Udah, Vin.
Okay. Speech as a modular system. Criteria for modularity by Fodor, a cognitive cognitive system is modular if it is first domain specific, operates on a mandatory basis, fast and ineffective by feedback. If speech is a modular system, then we might expect it to have a specialist neurological representation. This representation would not be based on general cognitive function, that is, working memory, episodic memory, and so on, but will be specific to language or possible specific to phonetic processing. Next. Okay, the problem of invariance. There is no one-to-one correspondence between acoustic. The lack of such an invariant relationship suggests that the perception of speech segments must occur through a process that is different from and presumably more complex than that of ordinary auditory perception. Next. Categorical perception. Wait. To comprehend speech, we must impose an absolute or categorical identification on the incoming speech signal rather than simply a relative determination of the various physical characteristics of the signal. That is, P or B, not their auditory cues as frequency and intensity. Its main speech is a special mode of perception. For B, O millisecond vote, and for P, 40 millisecond vote. Vowels are perceived differently from consonant. Stop consonants are indeed perceived differently than vowels. For while the vowels carrier of stress, rhythm, and prosody leaves a rapidly fading echo. The consonant leaves none. The initial sound of the, for example, is difficult, if not impossible, to hear. The sound escapes us and we perceive the event almost instantly as phonetic. Student Kennedy. Next. The motor theory of speech perception. Theory based on the notion that perception proceeds by reference to production. Listeners use implicit articulatory knowledge about how sounds are produced as an aid in perception. To some extent, this approach is motivated by the economy of using the same mechanism for both perception and production. But the main rationale for the motor theory is that it deals effectively with the lack of invariance discussed earlier. Lieberman and Colquist 1967 sounds produced in similar ways, but with varying acoustic representation are perceived in similar ways. The next presentation will be delivered by Sabilla.
Okay, guys, the next presentation will be delivered by me. So can I see the slide, please? Hello?
Yes, Bill, but we have 10 minutes left because the application has time limit. Cuma 40 menit.
Yaudah, ya. Perception of continuous speech. So yeah, the perception of continuous speech itself. Next slide, Finn. Hello? So the perception of continuous speech is a complex and difficult process, and yet we all do this daily. Whether we are listening to a friend's funny story or powerful political speech, we use the steps involved in understanding in the stem of language that allow us to communicate with others. So yeah, our ability to put together and understand continuous speech is what's make communication possible. Without being able to comprehend continuous speech, so we will be unable to understand what others expressing and we will be isolated. Next. Next, Finn. So yeah, speech segment. So about speech segment itself, vowel and consonant are identified differently. So why I say this? Because there are a lot of research we already know about this speech segment. But when isolated, vowels have a long and steady quality. However, the sound of vowel is strongly influenced the sound around it. So the example of the speech segment itself is like a person cannot make the sound in consonant like I, E, and K without expressing a vowel sound with it. Next. So about continuous speech. So in this part, I have two part of it. The first part is in bottom-up processing, and the second part is in top-down processing. Sorry guys if the sound is really crowded because, you know, like people for in bottom-up processing itself is people examine the sensory data and draw conclusion about what the sensory information means. In language, this means people hear the combination of phonemes and use that data to draw conclusion about which word are being produced. So in my opinion, for in bottom-up processing itself, have example of it, like you can explain about something that your friends, sorry, you can explain something that your friends didn't understand, but your friends have point of your story of your things that you already explained it. So the second one is in top-down processing. The opposite happened in this point. People think about what they expect to hear that and judging on the other context. They fill the blanks of the perception of continuous speech, realize on the combination of bottom and top-down processing. People are able to listen to available cues and understand what they fit with the context. The combination of processing allows us to rapidly understand continuous speech. Okay, next.
Okay, next. It's my turn. Okay, so perception of written language. So language can be written using different instruments. This sample of English writing was created with a pen, but other ways include she cells or on stones and computers. Written language is a method of capturing language using a variety of tools and materials, including pen and paper, chisels and stone, and computers. In this chapter, we will discuss about different type of writing system. They are orthography, logography, syllabary, and the alphabet. So orthography itself is a method of mapping the sounds of language onto a set of written symbols. And then logography takes the word or morphemes as the linguistic unit and pairs the unit with some pictorial symbol called the logograph, or we can say character. And then a syllabary takes the syllable as a linguistic unit and associates with some visual representations. And the last is the alphabet. We know that the alphabet is a system in which each letter is supposed to represent a phoneme. Any school child knows that there are many exceptions to one-tune associations between phonemes and letters, or graphemes, as they are sometimes called. And then levels of written language processing. As with speech perception, the perception of written language, at least in an alphabetic orthography, can be understood at a number of levels. We may distinguish among feature, letter, and word levels of processing. The first is feature level. Second is letter level, and the last is word level. So what is feature level? So featured level is kind of stimulus that represented in terms of the physical features that comprise a letter of the alphabet. And then the letter level is the visual stimulus that represented more abstractly as an identity separate from its physical manifestation. And the last is a word level. It's a kind of processing in which an array of features and letters is recognized as a familiar word. As the word is recognized, various properties of the words, such as its spelling, pronunciation, and meaning, become available to us. Okay, I think that's all from me. And this is the last presentation. Thank you for your attention. We may close our presentation. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.